Snow pressed hard against the windows of a small Michigan diner when a rich man lost his temper. A young waitress dropped to her knees, shielding her sick German shepherd puppy. Then the kick came. Bones cracked, the puppy screamed, and the entire room froze. What the arrogant heir didn't know was that someone was watching from the shadows. A tall, broken man in a worn leather jacket, 45 years old. Gray eyes, a past soaked in violence, a former Navy SEAL who hadn't stepped in for anyone in years. That night, one cruel mistake would expose a corrupt town, awaken a buried warrior, and prove that some men don't need uniforms to deliver justice. If you believe compassion can rewrite destiny, like the video. Subscribe for more stories and comment where you're watching. See where this story will go. Snow fell steadily over Marquette, Michigan, muting the harbor and pressing cold silence against a lonely diner near the docks. Inside the lamplight diner, the air smelled of burnt coffee fryer grease and wet wool coats slowly steaming dry. Ceiling fans turned uselessly above cracked linoleum floors, their low hum mixing with the distant groan of ships tied down for winter. Laura Mitchell moved between booths with practiced restraint, her slim frame slightly hunched from hours on her feet. At 26, she looked older than her years, shoulders narrow posture, guarded pale skin stretched tight across cheekbones that had learned how to brace for disappointment. Her light brown hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, strands escaping and clinging to her damp temples, and her hazel eyes carried the quiet vigilance of someone who had learned to expect trouble before it arrived. She wore a faded diner uniform, 2 sizes too big sleeves, rolled up to hide wrists that trembled when she thought no one was watching. Beneath the counter near the register sat a wicker basket, half hidden by Laura's oversized purse. Inside it, Rex lay curled tight, a 3-month-old German shepherd puppy with oversized paws and a black and tan coat still too soft for the world he'd been born into. His chest rose unevenly, each breath shallow and strained, a faint wheeze escaping when he shifted. Rex had been diagnosed with a respiratory infection 2 days earlier. The vet's words still echoed in Laura's mind. Don't leave him alone. Watch his breathing bring him back if it worsens. Laura had nodded then, even though she already knew she couldn't afford to miss work. Bills didn't pause for sickness. Rent didn't wait for mercy. So she'd made the choice that left a knot in her stomach. Bring him with her. Hide him, protect him, whatever the cost. Every few minutes, her eyes flicked downward, checking for movement, listening for sound, praying for silence. At the far end of the counter sat Daniel Brooks, 45 years old, 6 feet tall when he stood broad-shouldered but lean to the point of gauntness, as if life had slowly carved weight off his frame and never given it back. His dark brown hair brushed the collar of his worn leather jacket, streaked with gray at the temples, and a rough stubble shadowed his sharp jawline. His face was angular, weathered, the kind of face shaped by cold nights and harder memories. Gray eyes watched the diner through the steam, rising from his coffee distant and alert, at the same time like a man who never fully relaxed even when sitting still. He wore the same clothes he always did, a dark brown leather coat scarred with age, a red and navy flannel beneath it, faded jeans, heavy leather boots dusted with melting snow, and a gray wool scarf wrapped once around his neck. Daniel didn't look like he belonged anywhere anymore, and that suited him fine. He had chosen the corner seat deliberately. From there he could see the door, the counter, the windows, the reflections in the chrome fixtures. Old habits buried but never dead. He'd come to Marquette because it was quiet, because people minded their business, because the lake swallowed sound and secrets equally well. He wasn't here to intervene. He hadn't done that in years. But his eyes kept returning to the waitress with the tired shoulders and the basket she checked like a heartbeat. He recognized the look in her, someone balancing on the edge of collapse, held together by obligation and fear. He'd seen it before, on medics, on civilians caught between bad choices, on himself once. The diner door chimed sharply. Cold air rushed in carrying snow and entitlement. Ethan Caldwell entered first 29 years old, tall and athletic, in a polished, effortless way that came from money rather than work. His blonde hair was neatly styled, his clean-shaven face, handsome and arrogant blue eyes, already scanning the room with bored contempt. His expensive winter coat remained unbuttoned, as if the cold itself should know better than to touch him. On his arm hung Vanessa Reed, 27, slender and impeccably styled long blonde hair cascading over a pristine white coat that didn't belong in a place like this. Her skin was flawless, her lips tight with habitual dissatisfaction, and her gaze swept the diner as if measuring everything it found lacking. Laura felt the shift before she heard it. Vanessa's heels clicked too sharply against the floor as she slid into a booth, Ethan dropping across from her without a glance at the menu. Laura approached with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes, her voice polite, controlled. Vanessa barely looked at her while ordering, each word edged with irritation. When Laura returned moments later with the drinks, her hand brushed the table just wrong. A glass tipped. Soda spilled across the table, splashing onto Vanessa's coat. The silence that followed was immediate and heavy. Vanessa looked down at the spreading stain, then up at Laura. Her expression twisted, not surprise, not shock, but offense, as if something precious had been violated. Her voice rose sharp and theatrical, cutting through the diner. She insulted Laura's intelligence, her clumsiness, her worth. Laura apologized over and over, her face, burning hands shaking as she reached for napkins. Then Vanessa slapped her. The sound cracked through the room. Laura's head snapped to the side, pain blooming hot across her cheek. The sudden violence jolted the basket beneath the counter. Rex startled, coughing and yelping in fear. The sound was small but unmistakable. Ethan's attention snapped toward it. He stood towering, now eyes narrowing as he spotted the basket. Disgust curled his lip. "A dog," he said loudly. "You brought a filthy dog in here," Laura didn't think. She dropped to her knees, moving on instinct, curling her body over the basket as Rex whined beneath her. She wrapped her arms around it, shielding him, her voice breaking as she begged him to stop. That was when Ethan kicked her. The blow landed hard against her ribs, forcing the air from her lungs in a sharp, strangled gasp. Pain exploded through her side as she collapsed further over the basket, teeth-clenched vision blurring. The diner froze. No one moved. No one spoke. Daniel Brooks stood up. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He crossed the distance with measured steps, every movement deliberate. Ethan, breathing hard, lifted his leg again, anger flaring bright and careless in his eyes. Before the kick could fall, Daniel reached out and closed his hand around Ethan Caldwell's wrist, and the world held its breath. Cold air lingered inside the diner long after the door had closed, as if winter itself had followed violence through the threshold. Daniel Brooks's hand locked around Ethan Caldwell's wrist with quiet certainty. There was no anger in his face. No flare of emotion, only control. Years ago, rage had lived close to Daniel's skin, quick and dangerous, but that part of him had been buried beneath discipline and loss. Now his movements were economical, precise, shaped by training that never truly left the body. Ethan tried to pull back, muscles tensing, but Daniel rotated the wrist just enough, using leverage rather than strength. Pain shot through Ethan's arm, and his breath hitched in surprise. Daniel stepped in close enough that Ethan could smell leather and cold air on him, close enough to feel how still he was. No punches, no theatrics, just physics and experience. Ethan was forced down against the counter, his free hand splayed uselessly on the sticky surface, his arrogance dissolving into confusion and humiliation. Around them, the diner remained frozen. Laura Mitchell stayed curled on the floor, one arm wrapped protectively around the wicker basket, the other pressed to her ribs. Pain radiated through her side with every breath, sharp and bright, but fear was louder. Her cheek burned where Vanessa Reed had struck her heat, pooling beneath pale skin, already flushed with shock. She kept her eyes on Rex, whispering his name over and over, her voice barely sound. Rex trembled beneath her small body, shaking his breath, ragged but steady enough to make her cling to hope. The puppy's dark eyes were wide, glossy with fear, his ears pinned back, as if the world had suddenly grown too large and cruel. Vanessa stood several steps away, one manicured hand hovering uselessly in the air, her expression twisted between outrage and disbelief. She wasn't used to being ignored, least of all by men who didn't immediately bend. Her blonde hair had slipped loose from its careful styling, and for the first time that night she looked uncertain eyes darting between Ethan and the man restraining him. Ethan hissed through clenched teeth, calling Daniel names that slid off him without effect. Daniel didn't answer. He reached into his jacket with his free hand and pulled out his phone, already activating the camera. He recorded the scene, calmly panning once to capture Laura on the floor, the basket Ethan restrained Vanessa, shouting, "Evidence. Always evidence." When he spoke, his voice was low and steady, the kind of voice that didn't invite argument. He announced the address, the assault, the presence of a dog, the injuries. He called the police without raising his volume, without looking at Ethan again. Only when the call ended did he ease the pressure slightly, just enough to keep control without escalation. Ethan sagged, breathing hard, shock replacing fury. Sirens arrived quickly, their sound slicing through the tension. 2 officers entered the diner, boots crunching on tracked-in snow. The first was Officer Brian Keller, late 40s, stocky build, thinning dark hair beneath his cap, a mustache that drooped with habitual fatigue. His eyes moved automatically at first, taking in the scene with procedural distance. The second officer, Mark Jensen, early 30s, taller and leaner, watched more cautiously, his gaze lingering on Daniel's posture, on Ethan's pinned arm, on Laura on the floor. Keller's expression shifted the moment he recognized Ethan Caldwell. The weariness vanished, replaced by forced concern. He addressed Ethan by name, asking if he was hurt, his tone softening in a way that made Laura's stomach sink. Keller waved a dismissive hand after a brief glance at Laura. "Looks like a misunderstanding," he said, already shaping the narrative. Things got heated. He asked Daniel to step back to let Ethan go. Daniel complied slowly, deliberately, releasing Ethan only when Keller was in position, ensuring there would be no sudden retaliation. Ethan staggered upright, rubbing his wrist, his face flushed with embarrassed rage. Vanessa immediately moved to his side, her voice high and indignant, spinning the story before anyone could stop her. Laura tried to speak. The words tangled in her throat. Jensen crouched beside her, his voice quieter, asking if she could breathe if she needed medical attention. She nodded weakly, pain flaring as she shifted. Jensen noticed the way she shielded the basket, the way her body curved instinctively around it, and something tightened in his expression. But he said nothing when Keller shot him a warning glance. An ambulance was called more out of obligation than urgency. The incident was written down as a minor altercation. No arrests, no charges. Ethan avoided Daniel's eyes now, but his jaw was set, memorizing. Daniel stayed until the paramedics arrived. He stood a few feet away as Laura was helped onto a stool, her movements careful and slow. The medic, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and short auburn hair, gently examined Laura's ribs and cheek, her touch practiced and kind. Rex was checked quickly. His breathing, though strained, remained stable. Laura clutched the basket to her chest, as if it were the only solid thing left in the room. Shame crept up alongside pain, the familiar weight of being the one everyone looked past. When it was time for Daniel to leave, he didn't linger. He didn't offer comfort he knew might ring hollow. He stepped close enough that only Laura could hear him. His gray eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. "If they come back," he said quietly, "don't stay here alone." There was no threat in his tone, only certainty. He understood men like Ethan Caldwell. He had faced worse. He had once been worse, or close enough to know how they thought. Laura watched him walk out into the snow, his broad back disappearing into the white night. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know what he'd been. But she knew deep in her chest that the storm he carried hadn't passed. It had only been waiting. Snow fell harder the next morning, thick and relentless, burying Marquette beneath a weight that felt personal. Laura Mitchell woke with pain stitched through her ribs, each breath a reminder of the night before. The small apartment smelled faintly of old heat and detergent, the kind of place that had never quite felt like home, but had at least been shelter. Rex lay beside her on the thin mattress, his small body pressed against her side, warmth steady and real. His breathing was still uneven, but quieter now, and Laura rested her hand on his back, counting each rise and fall, as if it were a promise she could still keep. The world outside the window looked clean and white, but inside her chest everything felt bruised and fragile. Her phone rang just after 8. It was the diner. Mr. Howard, the manager, spoke in a voice that trembled beneath forced authority. He was a thin man in his early 50s with a permanently worried face, graying hair slicked back as if neatness could protect him from consequence. He cited health code violations, policy breaches, words that sounded rehearsed. An animal in the workplace. No exceptions. Immediate termination. Laura listened without interrupting, her free hand tightening into the blanket. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. She had learned long ago that pleading only prolonged humiliation. When the call ended, she sat still for a long moment, staring at nothing, the silence pressing in until Rex shifted and whimpered softly. She buried her face into his fur and breathed him in, grounding herself in the only thing that hadn't turned away yet. By noon, there was a knock at the door. Mark Ellison stood in the hallway, filling the frame with his solid, unyielding presence. 52 years old, broad-shouldered, his graying beard trimmed short, Mark wore a heavy parka and carried a clipboard like a shield. He had always been distant, a man who preferred rules to people, and today his eyes were flat, avoiding hers. He handed her the notice without stepping inside. 72 hours. Lease termination. Vague references to disturbances and liability. Laura felt the floor tilt beneath her feet, the walls suddenly too close. She nodded, signed where he indicated, and closed the door gently after him, as if loud sounds might shatter what little balance she had left. The third blow came that evening. Richard Hale arrived unannounced, his polished shoes tracking melting snow onto the entryway carpet. 46 years old, tall and sharply dressed, Richard had a narrow face and cold eyes that missed nothing. His dark hair was combed back precisely, his clean-shaven jaw rigid with practiced superiority. He introduced himself smoothly as legal counsel for the Caldwell family, his voice calm, almost kind, as if offering help rather than pressure. He sat at Laura's small kitchen table without being invited, placing a slim folder between them. Inside was money, enough to erase debt, enough to buy silence. All she had to do was sign a non-disclosure agreement, forget what had happened, move on quietly. Laura's hands shook as she pushed the folder back. She said no. The word came out thin but unbroken. Richard's expression shifted the mask, slipping just enough to reveal calculation. He leaned back, steepling his fingers, and spoke about animal control in the same tone one might discuss the weather. He mentioned aggressive dogs, unsafe environments, anonymous tips. He glanced once at Rex, who had risen on unsteady legs, a low growl vibrating from his chest despite his weakness. Laura felt ice settle in her veins. They weren't just threatening her. They were threatening the one thing she couldn't lose. She told Richard to leave. He smiled faintly, gathered his folder, and promised she would regret being difficult. That night, snow swallowed the street's visibility, shrinking to a few feet. Laura sat on the floor, surrounded by half-packed boxes, numb, listening to the wind rattle the windows. Rex lay beside her, head on her knee, eyes searching her face, as if asking what came next. The knock at the door made her flinch. When she opened it, Daniel Brooks stood there, snow clinging to his leather jacket and scarf, gray eyes, unreadable. He took in the boxes, the notice taped crookedly to the fridge, the fear she hadn't managed to hide. He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer sympathy. He simply said, "Get what you need." They left quietly, slipping into the storm, as if the night itself had agreed to hide them. Daniel's truck cut a slow path through unplowed roads, headlights carving tunnels through white darkness. Laura watched the town recede, a place that had never wanted her now actively pushing her away. She felt hollow, emptied of options, clinging to Rex and the steady hum of the engine. Daniel drove without speaking, jaw-set hands firm on the wheel. Inside him, old instincts stirred a familiar tension he had spent years suppressing. He had promised himself he would never get involved again, never be responsible for collateral damage. And yet here he was breaking that promise without hesitation. The cabin stood at the edge of the forest, weathered wood, half buried in snow, a single light glowing warm against the cold. Inside it smelled of pine oil and old memories. Daniel built a fire, while Laura settled Rex on a blanket near the hearth. In the flickering light, Daniel looked older, the lines in his face deepening the weight of past decisions visible in the way he moved. He showed Laura how to watch Rex's breathing, how to keep her voice steady, how to touch him with confidence instead of fear. He spoke quietly, teaching her how German shepherds read posture and tone, how they look for leadership when chaos threatens. "Stand up," he told her gently. "He needs to see you standing." As Laura straightened, something shifted inside her. She felt it small but real. Daniel watched her, recognizing the change. He had once been trained to lead men through fire, to hold ground when everything screamed retreat. He had lost that identity along the way, buried it under guilt and solitude. Teaching Laura, protecting Rex, stirred something painful and necessary. For the first time in years, he wasn't running from the storm inside him. He was facing it. Outside, the snow continued to fall, sealing the cabin off from the town below. For now they were safe. But Daniel knew this was only the beginning. And Laura, sitting by the fire with Rex's head in her lap, understood that every door behind her had closed. The snow eased into a brittle quiet, the kind that made sound carry too far and secrets feel exposed. Daniel Brooks woke before dawn, the habit as ingrained as breathing. The cabin was still fire reduced to embers, frost clinging to the window panes like a warning. Laura Mitchell slept on the couch, curled inward, Rex tucked against her chest. Even in rest, her body held tension, shoulders tight, one hand resting instinctively over the puppy, as if the world might try to take him again. Daniel watched them for a moment, a dull ache settling beneath his ribs. Protecting them felt natural. Staying felt dangerous. It started small. A set of tire tracks near the tree line that hadn't been there the night before. A dark sedan idling too long on the narrow road below the cabin. A figure standing too still at the gas station, when Daniel took Laura and Rex into town for supplies. Ethan Caldwell did not show his face at first, but his presence pressed in all the same. Daniel recognized the pattern immediately. Intimidation disguised as coincidence, fear planted quietly meant to grow on its own. Laura felt it too. Her voice dropped when she spoke. Her eyes kept searching reflections, windows, shadows. Rex, despite his illness, reacted first. His ears lifted at unfamiliar sounds, his small body angling protectively toward Laura, a low, uncertain growl rumbling when the sedan appeared again at dusk. Daniel filmed everything: license plates, timestamps, faces caught in reflections. He documented the way Ethan finally stopped hiding, standing across the road one evening, hands in his pockets, smiling without warmth. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The message was clear: I know where you are. The following morning, Daniel drove them into Marquette. Snow crunched beneath the tires as they pulled up outside the police station, a squat brick building that looked more municipal than just. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed over scuffed floors. Laura sat rigid beside Daniel Rex, tucked into a carrier at her feet, his breathing steadier now, but still fragile. Daniel requested to speak with the chief. Paul Harrington emerged from his office with the practiced ease of a man who had been in power too long. 58 years old, tall and broad, his uniform pressed impeccably, Harrington wore authority like armor. His silver hair was cut close, his face round, and ruddy eyes small but sharp beneath heavy brows. He smiled as he approached a gesture meant to disarm. Daniel noted the subtle signs immediately: the relaxed shoulders, the lack of urgency, the familiarity when Ethan's name came up. Daniel laid out the evidence calmly. He described the following: the threats without words, the intimidation. He offered video. Harrington glanced at it briefly, barely hiding his disinterest. He nodded, sighed, and leaned back in his chair. "You're reading too much into this," he said, voice smooth, paternal. "Small town. People run into each other. Mr. Caldwell is well known. He wouldn't risk something so obvious." Laura spoke, then, her voice tight but clear. She described the fear, the nights without sleep, the way Ethan watched her. Harrington's smile thinned. He suggested she was stressed, traumatized by the earlier incident. He used the word understandable. He promised to keep an eye on things, a phrase Daniel recognized as meaningless. No report was filed, no action taken. When Daniel pressed, Harrington's tone cooled. "I think it's best if you don't stir things up," he said quietly. "For your own good." They left with nothing but a copy of a generic incident form. Outside, Laura's hands shook as she buckled her seatbelt. Daniel felt the weight settle fully, then heavy and unmistakable. This wasn't negligence. It was design. The town wasn't broken. It was working exactly as intended, powered by favors, silence, and fear. On the drive back, Ethan appeared again. This time he passed them, deliberately slowing just enough to make eye contact, tapping the side of his nose in mock salute. Rex whimpered, pressing closer to Laura. Daniel's jaw tightened, his grip whitening on the steering wheel. Memories surfaced unbidden. Compromised locals bought officials. Civilians left exposed because the system had decided they were acceptable losses. He had seen this before, overseas, in places where corruption wore different uniforms but smelled the same. He had told himself he was done fighting those battles. Back at the cabin, Daniel reviewed the footage alone. Each frame confirmed what he already knew. Laura was no longer just a victim of circumstance. She was a liability to people with power, and he had placed himself squarely between them. He looked at Laura feeding Rex by the fire, her movements gentler, now steadier, the beginnings of strength showing through fear. Protecting her meant escalation. Walking away meant abandoning her to a system that had already failed. That night, Daniel stood outside beneath a sky heavy with clouds, phone in his hand. He hadn't made this call in years. He had promised himself he wouldn't. The last time he had asked for help like this, people had gotten hurt. Careers ended. Lines were crossed. But the line had already been crossed here, drawn by men who assumed no one would challenge them. He dialed the number from memory. It rang once, twice. A voice answered, crisp and controlled. Daniel identified himself without hesitation, using a name and credentials he had hoped to leave behind. He spoke plainly, stripping the situation down to facts: local corruption, intimidation, a civilian under threat, law enforcement compromised. He listened in silence as the voice on the other end asked precise questions. When he ended the call, his hands were steady. The decision once made felt inevitable. Inside, Laura watched him through the window, sensing the shift, even without understanding it. Daniel met her gaze and nodded once. The past he had run from was no longer behind him. It had been waiting patient and unfinished. And now he was walking back into it, not for redemption, not for duty, but because some storms had to return when the wrong people believed they owned the sky. Spring arrived quietly in Michigan snow, retreating into damp earth, as if nothing violent had ever lived beneath it. Daniel Brooks stood at the edge of the clearing outside the cabin, breath-steady eyes fixed on the tree line. The call he had made weeks earlier had changed everything. Once federal wheels began to turn, they did not stop politely. They crushed what lay beneath them. Laura Mitchell felt it before she understood it, the sudden shift in air, the sense that unseen forces were moving again. Rex, stronger now, lifted his head and barked once toward the road, not in fear, but alertness. The first federal vehicle arrived before sunrise, then another. Dark, unmarked SUVs stopped with deliberate precision, doors opening in controlled silence. Special Agent Helen Carter of NCIS stepped out first, a woman in her early 40s with sharp cheekbones, steel-gray eyes, and dark hair pulled into a severe knot. She wore a plain coat that concealed authority rather than advertised it. Her movements were efficient, her gaze assessing as if the entire world were a map she already understood. Behind her came two FBI agents, one tall and angular with a shaved head, named Thomas Reed, the other broader, older, with a calm, almost weary expression, named Michael Grant. These were not people who asked for permission. Daniel laid out everything: footage, timelines, patterns. He spoke without emotion, stripping the story down to facts, the way he had been trained to do when lives depended on clarity. Laura sat nearby, hands folded tightly, Rex at her feet. When Agent Carter asked her to speak, Laura's voice shook only once. She told the truth cleanly, without embellishment. The fear, the threats, the silence of the town. Carter listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When Laura finished, the agent nodded once. "That will be sufficient," she said. The trap was simple because men like Ethan Caldwell believed complexity was protection. Through controlled channels, a meeting was arranged. Daniel did not attend. He didn't need to. Laura was placed safely out of sight, Rex with her guarded by Agent Grant. Ethan arrived exactly as predicted, confident, careless. His blonde hair was still perfect, his posture relaxed, the smile of a man who had never paid for consequences. Richard Hale arrived moments later, suit, immaculate eyes, calculating. They spoke freely, assuming privacy, assuming power. They always did. Ethan's voice carried clearly through the hidden recorder when he spoke about ending the problem, about making Laura and the dog disappear, about how Chief Paul Harrington would stall anything that came up. His tone was casual, bored, as if discussing logistics rather than lives. Hale nodded along, adding details, smoothing edges. When the door opened and federal agents stepped in, the look on Ethan's face was not fear, but disbelief. The illusion shattered first. The man followed. Chief Harrington was arrested that afternoon in his own office. The badge he had worn for decades was removed without ceremony. The town watched as vehicles rolled out lights, silent but unmistakable. Businesses closed early. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Marquette learned all at once that silence did not equal safety. The aftermath was loud, then strangely quiet. News vans came and went. Statements were issued. Names that had once commanded respect became warnings. Daniel stayed at the edge of it all, present but untouched. He did not testify in front of cameras. He did not explain himself. His role was done the moment the truth could stand without him. Months passed. Summer softened the land. Laura's life rebuilt itself slowly, deliberately. She did not return to the diner. She did not look back. On a modest piece of land outside town, she opened a German Shepherd rescue, a place for dogs deemed difficult, aggressive, unmanageable. She named it simply without flourish. Rex grew into his body-leg's strong coat, glossy eyes steady. He became the heart of the place, greeting newcomers, demonstrating what patience and leadership could do. Laura changed too. Her posture straightened, her voice steadied. The fear that had once lived behind her eyes was replaced by something quieter and stronger. Daniel returned one last time on a clear afternoon. His truck pulled up the gravel drive, dust curling behind it. Laura looked up from repairing a fenced sun on her face-hands shore. Rex spotted him instantly and ran tail-high, barking in recognition. Daniel knelt as the dog reached him, hands sinking into thick fur. "You did good," he murmured, and Rex leaned into the praise like it mattered. They walked the property together, saying little. Words were unnecessary now. Daniel took in the kennels, the land, the confidence in Laura's movements. This was not rescue born of pity. This was purpose. At the edge of the field, Daniel stopped. He reached beneath his shirt and pulled free a worn chain with a single dog tag attached. He placed it in Laura's palm. "Keep it," he said simply, "for emergencies." Then he removed a folded tactical collar from his jacket and fitted it around Rex's neck with practiced ease. The dog stood still, solemn, as if understanding the weight of the gesture. There were no promises exchanged, no plans made. Laura met Daniel's gaze, gratitude and respect passing between them without words. Daniel nodded, once stepped back and returned to his truck. He drove away without looking back, leaving behind not the past he had escaped, but something worth protecting that no longer needed him. Sometimes the miracle is not thunder from the sky, but the right person standing up at the right moment. God works quietly through broken people, tired hands, and brave hearts that refuse to look away. In our daily lives, we may feel small, unseen, or powerless, just like Laura did. But faith reminds us that no act of courage is wasted, and no kindness goes unnoticed by Him. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment below and subscribe for more stories of light in dark places. May God bless you, protect your family, and walk with you every day.